Hello everyone. In this video we will see how we can implement create, delete and update operations using OData v4. Now if we check the home page of our app, we have this plus button right here, which we will use to create a new user. And for now, if we click, we are just navigated to the create page, but nothing else has been implemented yet. So let's begin by implementing this event handler. And if we open our home controller, we should see an empty handler named onPressCreate, and we just have the router here which navigates to our create page. But first let's comment this out and see how we can create a new user directly inside our home controller. And unlike OData v2, we don't have direct access to the v4 model with methods like create, read, etc. So we have to do these operations via either context bindings or list bindings. And we already have a list binding for us using the people endpoint. So let's first access that by this .getView. That's by ID, and our ID was just table. Then we say get binding context, just get binding, and we get the items binding. And now we can say that create, and we just need to pass in the initial data. I will pass in an empty object for now. And let's go back to our app and see what happens. When we click on plus, we see a new empty line here at the top, but we also get an error message because some of the fields are required, but we will fix that in a bit. Let's go back to our controller and actually remove this and instead implement our creation in our create controller. So we just have our, let's see, on create matched event handler here, and when the create route is matched, we would like to create a new user. And since we don't have any list which already has the people binding in our create view, let's quickly check what we have. It's just some forms for data input and a table for the trips. First we have to create a list binding using our OData v4. So we can say var o list binding equals, first we get the model, so this .get view .get model, and then we can use the bind list method. And we just need to pass in the endpoint, which will be people for us. And using this list binding, we can create a new context. So o context equals o list binding that's create, just like we did in the home controller, and we pass in an empty object for the initial data. And we just need to bind this new context to our view. So this .get view .bind, so reset binding context. And then we just pass in all context here. Now let's check again. When we click, we are navigated and we have a new user, but again we have some empty fields, so we get this error. If we check the batch request, we can see the error here. It's for the field username, it's required. And if we check the payload, it's just a post request to /people endpoint right here. To avoid this, we want to wait until the data is entered by the user, obviously, and we can make use of the inactive option for our create method. So let's get back to our code. And for this create method here, we get a few more properties after the initial data, which is the empty object. And let's actually check the documentation quickly. And here is our create method. And first flag is skip refresh, and it determines whether or not to skip the refresh of the newly created entity. We will set that to false. And next one is be at end, and when set to true, it will insert the new entity at the bottom of the list. Let's also set it to false for now. And finally, we have this be inactive flag, and when we set this, it will wait for the data to be entered instead of sending the post request right away. So it will create a so-called inactive context. Let's save this and now check what happens. Let's go back to the home page, create, and there is no batch request now. But let's see what happens if we enter something in one of these fields and go to another field or tab out. Now we can see that the batch request has been sent and it contains this data that we just entered, but that's also not what we want. Instead, we want to take full control of our create process, and we would like to send the post request whenever we want it. And to do that, we need to specify an update group ID, either in our model or in our binding. Let's see how we can do that for our binding. And here, when we create our list binding here, we also get a few more properties we can pass in. Let's also check that one. And here the first one is the context. If we want to create a relative context, since we will using the root level, we will just set this to null. Then we have two arrays or filters for the sorters and filters. And for those, I will just pass in empty arrays. We don't need any. And lastly, we have this parameters map. And in here we have, let's see, $, and it should be named update group ID. So let's copy this and we create a map and we set this to, let's say, update. Now if we save and go back to our app, we can fill in the fields, etc., do anything we want, but it's not going to send any post request. So we can do this manually whenever we want. Now I don't want to set this update group ID for every binding I create, and if we don't specify one, it will be inherited from our model. So let's set it to our model. I will just comment this part out. Let's actually duplicate it. So this is all we need. And if we go to our manifest.json file, here we have our group ID, and let's see, we removed the update group ID, so let's add that one. And we will set it to update, which we will use when we want to send our requests, update, delete, or create, it doesn't matter. Now let's also implement the logic to add new trips when we create a new user. So this button right here, and it will be exactly the same. Let's go to the create controller again, and here we have on press add trip. And here we just first need to access our list binding for the trips table. If we check our create view, here is our table and this is the ID. And here we can say this dot get view dot by ID, and again it's using the items binding, so we say get binding items, and again we can just say dot create. We don't want any initial information, so an empty object, and we set the skip refresh, and this time we will set the at end flag to true. So the newly created trip will appear at the end of our list. And then lastly, we set the inactive flag to false because our whole view context is inactive already, so we don't need to set this also to true. Let's save and check what we have. So when we click, maybe there's an error. Yes, get binding, I have a typo. Check again. We can enter some data, and now we can also create new trips. And if I add some data here and add a new one, it should appear at the bottom. since we set this flag be at end to true. Now lastly, let's implement our save handler when we click on save here. And it's again in the create controller on press save right here. And first let's get our model, where our model equals this dot get view dot get model. And then we can say our model dot submit batch. Now we will use submit batch to send our changes to the backend using our update group ID. And we have to pass in the update group ID, and we don't have to hard code it from here. We actually have a method to get it from our model, which is our model dot get update group ID, which will return us our update group ID, and this whole thing, submit batch, will return a promise. So we can say that then when it resolves, we can say function, and it will resolve without any data, so we don't have any arguments here in our function. And here first I will do a quick error check. It's already implemented in our, let's see, component.js. It's just reading the message model, and if it detects any error, it sets this, let's see, b error on our component to true. So for errors, we will check that one. If there is no error, so we can say this dot get owner component dot be error. So if there is no error, first let's get our resource bundle for our message to display, where all bundle equals this dot get view dot get model. It's the i18n model. Then we can say that get resource bundle, and then we can display a success message using a message toast that show, and the text we would like to display is obundle.getText, and the key should be something like user created. Let's check. Exactly, so let's copy this. And since we will navigate back to the home page, to the detail page after the creation, let's also set this variable named close on browser navigation to false, so it remains open after the navigation. And finally we can navigate to the detail page. So we can say UI component dot get router for this, and dot nav to, and the detail page, the detail route is called details. Then we have our navigation parameters. User ID is required, and we can get it from our binding context since it will be returned from the backend. So we can say this dot get view dot get binding context dot get property, and the property for our ID is just ID with capital letters. We can check that again from our service. And for entity type people, we have this ID field, and that's what we use for navigation. And lastly, let's also set the no history flag to true after the navigation. And for this function, let's bind this keyword to our controller. Is it this one? Actually, yes, not this one, but here. Now let's try to create a new user. Let's open the network tab, and username, let's say new user, first name Jackie, last name Wallace, gender is male, age 28, street, let's say 12 Haywood Street, postal code NC001. Sorry, this is the city, Night City, postal code, country USA, and let's add 1 or 2 trips. Pyramid Song, discover Sunken City, starts at, doesn't matter, today, ends at tomorrow, price 1800, and currency, let's say US dollar. Let's add another one. Let's call it the ride. Night ride in Night City. Starts here and here. And this one is 900 USD. Now let's press on save. And we get back our success message. And this one is the post request that we sent using our update group ID with our payload, and this one is the get request coming from the details page, and we can see all the information we entered is here. Now let's see how we can delete entities, and we can start by deleting, let's see, a new trip. Let's find our new user. Actually, we can go to the create page, and we want to first implement the deletion for these trips right here. So let's get back to our code in create controller, and here we have on remove trip event handler, and here first let's get the item that was clicked, var o item equals o event dot get parameter, and the parameter name is list item with a capital I. And we just need to delete this context, so we can say o item dot get binding context, and we can simply say dot delete. Let's save and try. Let's add a bunch, 1, 2, 3, and if we delete 2, it's gone. If we delete 1, it's also gone. And lastly, let's also implement the deletion for the users themselves, because we can also delete them using these buttons right here. And for that, we go back to our home controller, and here we have on press delete, and it will be exactly the same, except that after the deletion, we will send our post request to the backend so it's evaluated. First, let's copy this from here, and now since we have specified an update group ID, the request will not be sent automatically. So let's also get our model, or model equals this dot get view dot get model, and now we can again say o model dot submit batch, and again o model dot get update group ID, and that's it. And now let's try to delete this second one, JSmith, and here again we have 2 requests. It's gone already. This is the delete one, this is the get one to refresh our page, and you can see the counts haven't been refreshed, but I will skip that to save some time. Feel free to implement those yourselves. Now that we have almost everything for the edit part, let's also implement that as well. Let me close this and open the edit controller, and we should have on press add trip right here, which will be again exactly the same as create, so I will just copy that. And next is remove trip. Again, it will be the same, since all the IDs are the same for edit and create. And now for the save, let's also do what we did for create. Our o model equals this get view get model. This should be lowercase I. And we say model.submit batch and pass in the update group ID. And we can say then function. Again, it doesn't resolve with any data. Make sure to bind this. Then again, let's check for errors. Actually, let me just copy what we did here. We have this if statement here. And if there is no error, instead of user created, we will say changes saved. And we will again navigate back to the details page using the ID of the person we just edited. Let's save and also try this one. Let's edit this user. We click on edit. Let's say ASD here, age to 42, and let's remove this ski trip. And let's save. And the trip is gone, age is updated, and first name has also been updated. Now lastly, for the cancel buttons in edit here and also create, let's implement those and reset all the changes we made in our model. So if we check the edit controller first, we have on press cancel, and we are currently just navigating back to the details page. But let's also get our model and reset all the changes we made. So our model equals this get view get model. And before the navigation, we can say model.reset changes. And again, we will pass in our update group ID, so only the changes belonging to that group ID are reset. Get update group ID. Let's also copy these two lines into our create controller. Where is cancel? Okay, right here. We reset all the changes and navigate back to the home page for the create one. Let's try this. Let's get this back to Anil. Save. It is saved, and if we edit and add something more here and press on cancel, looks like we have another error. It's not defined. Okay, let's see, because it should be all model.get update group ID. Let's try again. It's back to Anil. We add something, cancel, and we are back with our changes reset. That would be all for this video, and see you in the next one.